G'day viewers, if you search up DIY background on the YouTube, you're going to see a lot of videos using styrofoam and cement. And for me, styrofoam is way too messy and cement screws around with your water parameters and it's messy as well. So I've made this one out of paper and resin. And if you want to find out how, stay tuned.
So first thing we need to do, viewers, is figure out how big our background needs to be, which is achieved fairly easily using the tank it's going to go in and a tape measure. So you just want to measure the inside dimensions and up to the height of that brace. And now, because I want the pickup for my canister filter to be hidden in behind the background, I'll have a measure to make sure the background sticks out enough and there's enough room in behind it for that to fit. So as I said, we're not going to use styrofoam because it just makes way too much mess, and that's even if you can get a piece big enough and dense enough for what you need. So a cheaper, more environmentally friendly and cleaner and simpler version, we're going to whip up a bit of paper mache. So I've managed to score some shredded paper here, but you can tear up some newspaper, whatever. So that goes in a bucket, and to help speed things along a little bit, we'll pour in some nice hot water. Get it all wet, fill it up to just the level of the paper. You don't want too much water because then it becomes too much of a mess. And we'll let that soak for a while till the paper absorb all that water. And to make things a lot quicker, we'll give it a bit of a buzz with this paint stirrer on the drill. It'll just help chop it up and mix it up. If you haven't got one of these, you can leave it in. You can mix it by hand or just leave it in for a lot longer to soak up that water, but this is just to save a bit of time. Now we have a bucket full of nice sloppy mess. It's going to be too wet to work with and take for absolute ever to dry out. So to make life easier, we're going to strain it through this old sheet. So just tip it right on, then we'll pick it up and give it a twist, give it a squeeze and get most of the water out. But we don't want it too dry because then we won't be able to mold it very well. It'll just go all clumpy on us. So just squeeze the majority of the water out of it. So using the tank dimensions I've measured earlier, I've made up this frame. It's just a sheet of ply cut to the size of the inside of the tank, and with that lip that goes across the top and the two sides, and they will be the height and the depth we want. And that is measuring there. That's just to make sure I have enough room to cut out a notch for the overflow and for that intake for the canister filter to fit behind. And now I know I said no styrofoam, but these are just a few little offcuts I had laying around, and I'm going to stick those there just so we don't have to build it up with paper, because the more paper mache we have, the longer it's going to take to dry. And then so I'll just run a bit of cling wrap, cling film, saran wrap, you know what it is. We've run that over there, so if any resin makes its way through the paper, it won't stick to the board, because in my practice run that's what happened, and it ended up a god awful mess. So we'll just run a bit of plastic across there because the resin we're going to use won't stick to that. Now to save you watching me have to do battle with the cling wrap, here it is all ready to go. So now it's just a matter of grabbing our wet paper, our paper mache, and just forming it up into whatever design you like. I'm going for a muddy riverbank feel, so I don't want any sharp edges. It's just going to flow like a bit of washed out riverbank. And I'll be sure to add a couple of sort of lower valleys where the resin is going to get a lot closer to the bottom. So once all this paper mache is removed, on the back we'll have a couple of mounting plates that'll sit flat against the glass where we can silicone the middle to the glass, so it'll just stop any flex and it'll just mount a lot easier. So now this is the first layer completed, and it looks a bit rugged, and because I squeezed a lot of that water out it's clumped a little bit, but I'm not minding that because I want it to dry a little bit quicker. So we'll let this one dry overnight, which is fine here because it's about 28 degrees here at the moment. But if you're in a colder area, you might want to bring it inside and it might take a day or two. But we will come back for the next part. So this is the next day, and what I did, I put a little bit more water in with the remainder of the paper overnight, and it's gone really soggy. So the first layer is nice and hard, and so I'm just using this absolute mush, and I'm going to do a very fine layer just to smooth out any gaps that have formed as the first layer dried. And yeah, this is almost like plastering. It's just making it all very nice and smooth. And I don't know about you viewers, but for me, this is so much easier than trying to cut out a shape. This way you can build it up, and if you're not happy with it, you can always take a bit off or add a little bit more. Whereas styrofoam, if you cut too much off, well, you're kind of stuck with it, aren't you? But this way, yeah, even I can do it. Simple. And now that our mould, our paper mache is dry, we're going to use this river table epoxy. It's a 2-part epoxy, which means it's 1 part hardener by volume to 2 parts of the epoxy. So when we mix this stuff up, it's always a really good idea to wear gloves. So we'll chuck some of those on. Whoops, broke the first one. I think we better try that again. And no matter what I did, as slow as I went, I just kept tearing through gloves and I couldn't figure it out. Doctors know how to do it, and they're not as smart as truck drivers. So this part did get a little bit frustrating, to be perfectly honest. But then I thought, what about if I blew in it and my big fat hand might fit in there without tearing the back out of the glove? And viewers, look at that. It worked, so we're good to go. On to the next step. Now, as I said, it's a 2-part epoxy. Now, the manufacturer says to put the hardener in first for some reason. So we probably can't see, but I put a mark on that little plastic glass there. And so I've put 1 part by volume of the hardener in. Now I need 2 parts, which is twice as much, of the epoxy itself. And then once we have that in, mix it for at least 2 to 3 minutes and scrape it from the edges, scrape it from the bottom, really mix it together. Although this stuff is pretty good, there's not a lot of fumes and it doesn't create a lot of heat, but we're still going to do it in a well ventilated area and wear our gloves. Remember, here at Gill's Fish Room, safety first. And now to add a little bit of colour, going to use the cement oxide, which is the stuff you mix in for cement or mortar or render or anything to get that colour. It's perfectly fine, so we're going to use that, and it comes in a wide range of colours. And you don't need to use it for the first 1 or 2 layers. I'm just going to use it because it makes it easy to see where I've painted, and it'll really help add a bit of depth to the colour. So this colour is sandstone. So we're going to start with the lightest colour first. So we give that a mix in and then we just paint it onto our mould. Now the first layer of that paper is going to absorb a fair bit. So we need to mix up a little bit extra. And I know what you're thinking, oh, that paper is going to absorb all that resin. You're going to have paper stuck to it and it's going to go all through the aquarium. Well, I did think of that. So ideally this needs 4 layers of resin. So I'm going to put 3 on the front and I'll put 1 on the back, and that means any small pieces of paper left in there will work like the fibre part of fiberglass, and it'll only strengthen it even more. So now we just paint that on, and now might be a good time to give credit where credit's due. This method, not the paper mache part but the resin part, I learnt from Steve Baines. He's a guy who's been around for about 50 odd years doing this sort of stuff, and what he doesn't know about enclosures and fish and aquariums and things like that's probably not really worth knowing. So the part with the resin and the oxide, and the last step I got from him, but he uses styrofoam for the mold, and as I've said, I don't want to use it. It's too messy, too hard, so I'm trying out using paper mache, because you know me, I'm a lot more environmentally friendly. Speaking of which, don't even bother trying to clean the brushes or clean any of this gear. You'd need more acetone than what you'd know what to do with to try and clean that brush, so I just bought a bunch of really cheap brushes, and unfortunately we just have to chuck them out because there's no point even trying to clean any of it. So let's talk a little bit about the resin itself. It's, as I said, it's food grade. This stuff is really good because you could do like a 2-inch deep cast, or unlike a lot of resins, this one you can only go to 1 millimeter, so it's perfect for this, so we can build up our layers. And ideally it won't cure below 10 degrees, but ideally you want it to go at about 25 degrees, which is fine for me here in the summer. If I was doing it in the winter, I'd just put it inside in the fish room, or just put it near a heater somewhere. Now I left this for about almost 24 hours, and it's gone all nice and hard. Curing time is really going to depend on temperature. So we just rinse and repeat and add layer number 2. So now it's the next day again. Both the first 2 layers are cured. It's nice and hard. So now I'm going to remove as much of that paper mache as I can off the back. So we'll just give it a scrape. We'll rip off what we can with our hands first, and then we'll take it outside and give it a hose off, and then with a brush, and we'll try and get as much of that off as we possibly can. And another advantage of doing paper mache over styrofoam is we get to throw our paper in the bucket, wet it up again, and we get to use it over and over and over. I don't know how many times, but I think you'd probably get 2 or 3 out of it without too much drama. Way better than styrofoam. And there we are outside, giving it a rinse off and a bit of a scrub just to get as much of that paper off as we can. Although not a lot came off outside, most of it just pulled off by hand. So now waiting till all that paper is dry, though there's not a lot stuck to it, but the back of it is dry and it's a little bit furry, so we'll just throw a coat on. I didn't bother putting any colour in this one, so we'll just paint that on. That way all that paper is sealed, and yeah, the paper can only really serve to strengthen that resin. So now that's coat number 3, so I'll let that dry overnight and take it outside for coat number 4. And this is where it gets a bit exciting. So now we're outside for our final layer. Mix up the epoxy as per usual. And there's the back there. Look at that. Hard as a rock. Beautiful. And there's our mounting spots I spoke of earlier. So now this layer is going to be a little bit different, because this is the one where we're going to add the colour to make it look more realistic. So first off, I start off with the sandstone, and we're going to do all the higher parts in that lighter colour. And the next colour is chocolate, which is a slightly darker, slightly different brown. That's about how I describe it. And I aim to use that on the sort of medium height, like on the edges where we have the lighter stuff on the top, and this will start to try and give us a bit of depth, because even basic art class, you know, the lighter's towards the front and it gets darker towards the back in the shadow. And now the last colour I have is black, so I'm going to add just a small amount at a time, because if you go too dark you can't go back, we have to start again. So just a little bit of black, and then I'll start going into those deeper crevices and around the base more to try and give us that depth. But I'll put a little bit of black in, see how it goes, and I can easily add black. But like I said, if we go too dark, well, show's over. So I'm sure someone a little bit more creative than me could probably do a better job, but you can even see there, just that little bit, it's just starting to lift that out and really show the contours and add a bit of depth. So now I think that about does it. Michelangelo it is not, but hopefully it will look alright once it's underwater. So you might be wondering, why have I done this layer outside when everything else has been in the shed? Well, viewers, you're about to find out. As the resin dries and hardens, you might have noticed it goes really shiny, and dirt in the river underwater isn't all shiny. So we're going to mix in a bit of sand. I've got the lightest colour sand I can find, and I've just run it through a fish net to get any lumpy bits out, or any smaller or bigger pieces I should say. So we're going to end up with a really nice, fine, textured sand. Now this is the really fun part. We've got to throw it in as hard as we can, because if you just sit it on top, some of it might stick to the resin, but throwing it forces it into the resin, according to Steve Baines. So let's see if he's right. We'll peg some sand at it, and then we'll shake off the excess, and we'll leave that outside to dry and then see what happens. And now that it's dry, this is what we've ended up with. Nice and hard, both sides, and we have our mounting points there. And now here's the big test to make sure it's going to fit inside the tank, otherwise all this hard work's been for nothing. So very, very carefully so don't scratch anything. And look at that, beautiful. We've got a little bit of room each side, which I allowed for, but fill that up with silicone. So I notched out where I want my drain to be. I was going to have it hidden behind, but I really want to see the drain in case it gets clogged up, because that can end up with an awful mess. It's just the overflow drain for when I'm changing water. And that fits on there pretty good. And the intake for the canister filter fits in there nicely, but there's no way for the water to get to it. It'll only be able to get in underneath and over the top, so we better drill some holes for access. No doubt you've all seen someone drill a hole. You've probably even drilled a few yourself, so we won't get too much into it. It's halfway up. This way we'll be drawing water from the middle of the water column. There'll be some coming through the sand up underneath, and maybe even a little bit over the top for a bit of surface skimming action. Yes, I have really thought this out. Now I did remove the brace from the top of this tank to do this. I could have made the background in two parts, but for the rest of the scape it was just a lot easier to get that brace out of the way. So now we're going to silicone this in. Put some silicone in our two little mounting parts we've made earlier, and then we'll just run a bead all the way around the outside. And then once we put it in, we'll run a bead down those sides, and I'll throw some of that sand on it so it doesn't look like silicone, it just looks like sand. And I've just had it laying on the side here, let gravity do its work. It sits fairly flat. If it sat up anywhere, I'm doing it like this, I could put a little bit of weight on to squash it down, but fortunately didn't need to. So while that's curing, let's go out to our stick bathtub where I've been soaking a few sticks and pieces of wood, and I'm looking for things with a bend in it, because the idea being this is a riverbank where it's washed out underneath a tree, and so there's tree roots coming out of the mud. So I want something that's going to come out and bend down. So now it's just a matter of playing around, starting with the big ones first, have a look where things are going to go, and then cut them to fit. So I've decided on the placement for the first two bigger pieces, and I think this is a good time for today's top tank tip. Now if you've ever tried to silicon sticks into an aquarium, you know it might hold for a couple of days, but generally the silicon won't attach to a stick, but super glue will. So we're going to put a thin layer of super glue on that stick and then let it dry and let it harden. And once that super glue is cured, there's a surface there that I have found is a lot better for the silicon to stick to. So I applied silicon to both ends of the stick. Now this stick didn't have any super glue on it, and it's not very difficult to peel that silicon straight off. Now the other end with the super glue, it's stuck there fairly well. And that is today's top tip. So now I'll just start off mounting the larger main pieces and then work our way down to the smaller ones. And wherever they crossed, I joined the sticks together just for a bit of added strength, but I forgot to film that part, so here's a reenactment. So wherever the sticks touch, like that, I just add a little bit of super glue and a small piece of toilet paper. So apply a little bit of super glue, which will hold the paper there, and then whatever size toilet piece of paper you think you need, go about half of it. So we'll scrunch that, we'll jam it in there and then cover it with super glue, and that'll just turn that paper into plastic and it'll hold our sticks. And then so we don't end up with a big unsightly white patch in the middle of our natural aquarium scape, we'll keep some of that sand that we used earlier and we'll tip that in and it'll stick to the outside of the super glue and hopefully hide that join. Leave it for a while and there we go. That's our join there, lovely. Now there's all my main branches there, and I just used some zip ties wherever they crossed and I glued them just to keep everything still so we don't bump anything and move it, while we add some details to the back. And to complete the look, I just wanted some small twigs, which will be like roots emerging from that riverbank. So I'll have a bit of a play around to see where it's going to fit, where it's going to look nice. And to make it look like it's actually emerging out, we'll sand down that end so it sits flush against the background. Now I've run out of sandpaper, so I'm just using a pad off the orbital sander, but it's all the same. So I'll just smooth down that end so it sits nice and flush, so it gives the appearance of actually emerging from that background. Now it's just a matter of putting a dollop of super glue on anywhere where that stick is going to touch either the background or any of our other little fine tree roots there, and then cover it with sand to hide that glue so everything blends in nicely. And then now I've got the silicone out, we'll just silicone our brace back into position, and then we'll leave this out in the shed for the week for that silicone to cure and gas off, and then we'll give it a clean up and take it inside. So a week later our silicone's cured and we'll remove those zip ties and then just make sure everything's going to stay where we want it to, so when we fill it up full of water we don't have sticks floating everywhere and things moving, but it feels pretty solid, so I think we're okay with this one. Before it goes inside, we'll just give everything a quick rinse out, get any loose pieces of resin or glue or silicone or anything left in there. Then we'll take it inside, throw some substrate in. Now the tank's all cleaned up, it's on the rack inside, and I've added the substrate there is the same sand I used for the background. And I've just got a workshop light on just so we can get a good picture of it. And it'll look better once we've finished, I think, but I'm fairly happy with the way this one's turned out.
So now we've got it in place, let's see what it looks like with some water in.
So now it's full of water, and Nothing's floated away, nothing's moved, and I'm pretty happy with the result. So the next video we will go to escaping, we'll do some custom lighting, and we'll finish this one right off, and we'll end up with the fish in it. But we'll probably leave this video here. I've spoken for long enough, so if you're still awake and like leaving likes, leave a like. And well, as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. And one there.